The tires of the rented sedan crunched over gravel and dead pine needles, a sound that was both foreign and hauntingly familiar to Elara Vance. She killed the engine, and the subsequent silence felt like a physical weight. Through the windshield, the house stood sentinel against a sky the color of bruised lilacs, promising rain. It was exactly as she remembered, and yet, a ghost of itself. Honeysuckle House. The name, whispered in her childhood with a kind of reverent joy, now felt like a taunt. The once vibrant white clapboard was gray and peeling, like sun-bleached bone. The wraparound porch sagged in the middle, a tired smile missing a few teeth. And the honeysuckle itself, the plant that gave the house its name, was a tangled, invasive monster, throttling the railings and climbing towards the roof as if trying to reclaim the structure for the earth. Elara stepped out, the crisp Maine air, scented with damp earth and pine, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled atmosphere of her high-rise apartment in Manhattan. She was a woman built for corners and straight lines, not this untamed, sprawling beauty. Her black pencil skirt and cashmere coat were armor against the memories this place threatened to unleash. 20 years. She hadn't set foot in Cedar Hill for 20 years, not since the summer she turned 18, when her heart was not a thing to be strategically managed and protected by ironclad contracts, but a wild, hopeful thing that beat in time with the cicada's song. A movement on the porch caught her eye. A man emerged from the shadows, not with the hesitant step of a stranger, but with the easy ownership of someone who belonged. He was tall, broad-shouldered, clad in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and a tracery of faded scars. His hair was still the same sun-streaked brown, though it was shorter now, and lines fanned from the corners of his eyes, etched by sun and laughter. Liam Byrne. Her breath hitched, a tiny traitorous sound swallowed by the vastness of the woods. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze, the color of the Atlantic on a stormy day, sweeping over her with an unnerving intensity. There was no surprise in his eyes, only a deep, weary recognition. "Elara," he said, and her name on his lips was not a welcome. It was an accusation. "Liam," she replied, her voice carefully modulated, the crisp consonants a shield. "I wasn't expecting a welcoming committee." Small town. News travels fast, especially when a Vance comes back to town. He crossed his arms, his posture relaxed yet immovable. "Heard you were coming to sell." "That's the plan. I'm here to assess the property and arrange for its swift and profitable sale." She gestured towards the house with a manicured hand. "It's clearly a teardown. The land is the real value." A flicker of something dark, anger, pain, crossed his face. "A teardown?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Of course you'd say that. You always were in a hurry to get out of here, to erase this place. I just didn't think you'd go so far as to literally erase it." The old wound, the one she thought had calcified over, throbbed. "Sentiment doesn't pay the bills, Liam. And it doesn't preserve rotting wood and faulty wiring. This isn't a home, it's a liability." "It was your grandmother's home," he said, his voice dropping, low and fierce. "It was her life. She loved every splintered board of this place. She asked me to look after it, you know, after you stopped visiting." The words landed like a physical blow. Her grandmother, Eleanor, had been her sanctuary, the one person who understood the restless, ambitious fire in her. But the demands of building Vance Holdings into an empire, the relentless climb, had left little room for trips to a sleepy coastal town. The guilt was a cold stone in her stomach, but she wouldn't let him see it. "And I'm sure you did a fine job," she said, her tone dripping with icy civility. "But my responsibility is to my company and its shareholders now. A developer has made a very generous offer for the entire parcel. They're planning a gated community of luxury waterfront properties. It will bring significant revenue to the town." Liam took a step forward, and for a moment, she was 18 again, feeling the sheer, terrifying force of his presence. "It will gut the town's soul, Elara. This isn't just any house. It's one of the original historic homes. It's on the register. There are protections." "We'll see about that," she said, meeting his gaze squarely. I have the best lawyers money can buy. And I always get what I want. He held her stare, the air crackling between them with 2 decades of unsaid things. And what you wanted, he said softly, once upon a time was me. Before she could form a retort, a crack of thunder split the sky, and the promised rain began to fall, first in heavy sporadic drops, then in a relentless drenching curtain. Liam didn't flinch, his gaze still locked on hers. You should go, he said, though he made no move to leave himself. The roof leaks in the east bedroom. Your old room. He turned and walked away, disappearing into the silver veil of rain, leaving Elara standing alone in the downpour, the past and present colliding in a storm of their own making. The war for Honeysuckle House had begun, and her first opponent was the ghost of the boy she'd loved, now a man who seemed as rooted and unyielding as the ancient oaks that surrounded them. The key, a heavy, tarnished brass thing, stuck in the lock. Elara jiggled it with a growing sense of frustration, the rain plastering her hair to her scalp and seeping through the shoulders of her expensive coat. With a final, gritty turn, the lock gave, and the heavy oak door swung inward with a mournful creak. The smell hit her first. Beeswax, dried lavender, and the faint, sweet scent of pipe tobacco. Her grandfather's, though he'd been gone for 30 years. It was the smell of her childhood, of safety, of unconditional love. It was a scent that bypassed her cynicism and went straight to a part of her she kept under lock and key. She stepped inside, her heels echoing on the wide plank pine floor. The foyer was dim, lit only by the storm-gray light filtering through the dusty windows. To the left was the formal parlor, still furnished with the velvet settee and the grand piano no one had ever known how to play. A fine layer of dust covered everything, motes dancing in the slanted light. It was a museum of a life, frozen in time. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from her COO Mark. Board is anxious for an update on the Cedar Hill acquisition. ETA on the sale. She typed a quick, terse reply. Assessing the situation. There's a local preservation issue. We'll handle it. Handle it. The words felt hollow in this house. She walked through the downstairs rooms. The dining room with its massive table, the cozy breakfast nook, the library whose shelves were crammed with well-thumbed books. Every object, every faded photograph on the wall, was a thread pulling at the carefully woven tapestry of her present. In the kitchen, she found a note on the counter, held down by a mason jar filled with wildflowers that were now brittle and brown. The handwriting was her grandmother's, elegant and looping. For my Elara, if you ever come home. The faucet in the sink still drips. Liam knows how to fix it. The good chocolate is in the top left cupboard. Don't forget to breathe, my darling. Love, Gran. Tears, hot and unexpected, pricked at the corners of her eyes. She swiped them away angrily. This was why she hadn't come back. This debilitating wave of sentiment. It was a weakness she couldn't afford. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her back. It was Mark calling this time. She took a steadying breath and answered, her voice all business. Mark. Elara, what's the holdup? Is the property not as described? It's a dump, she said, the words harsher than she intended.
Structurali unsun, ide bajar.
But the land is pristine. The developer, Ocean View Estates, is salivating. The offer is 7 figures. Then let's move. Get a local contractor in for a teardown quote. Fast and dirty. Her eyes drifted to the window, to the dripping, overgrown garden where a stone birdbath stood tilted. She thought of Liam's face, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes. There's a complication. A local contractor. Liam Byrne. He's influential. He's talking about historical registries. Mark laughed, a dry rasping sound. A small-town handyman? Get a real lawyer, Elara. Bury him in paperwork. That's what we do. I know what we do, she snapped, then softened her tone. I'll handle it. I'm meeting with the town council tomorrow. Good. Don't let nostalgia cloud your judgment. You're the Ice Queen of Vance Holdings for a reason. Freeze him out. He hung up. Ice Queen. The nickname used to be a badge of honor. Here, in this warm, memory-soaked house, it felt like an epitaph. Later, after changing into dry clothes, she ventured into the small study her grandmother had used. The desk was piled with papers, gardening catalogs, and ledgers for the local historical society. Eleanor had been its president for 40 years. Tucked under a glass paperweight was a faded black and white photograph. It was of a young Eleanor, standing right here on the porch of Honeysuckle House, next to a young man who wasn't Elara's grandfather. On the back, in ink that had faded to sepia, was written, "With Thomas Byrne. A Summer of Possibilities. 1954. Byrne. Elara's heart stuttered. Liam's grandfather. She stared at the photo, at the hopeful, untroubled smiles. What had happened? What possibilities had been lost? A strange sense of dread settled over her. This wasn't just about a house. It was about history, about a promise made between families, a thread that had been woven long before she was born and had now, somehow, tangled itself around her and Liam. The war had just become infinitely more complicated. The Cedar Hill Town Hall was a modest brick building that housed the library, the police department, and the council chambers. Walking in felt like stepping onto a movie set for a film about quaint, insular small-town life. Everyone knew everyone. Conversations halted as Elara entered, her sharp city silhouette a stark contrast to the practical fleeces and canvas jackets. She took a seat at the back of the council chamber, a room smelling of old wood and lemon-scented polish. Liam was already there, up front, leaning against a wall and talking in a low voice with an older woman with kind eyes and a fierce jawline, Mayor Evangeline Van Stone. Van called the meeting to order, and the town proceeded with its business, debating the budget for new park benches, a complaint about a noisy rooster, the planning for the annual Founders' Day festival. Elara listened with a growing sense of surrealism. This was the machinery she was up against. Not a corporate board, but a debate about poultry. Finally, Van looked toward her. "I believe we have a guest with some business. Elara Vance, welcome back to Cedar Hill. You have the floor." Every eye in the room was on her. She stood, smoothing her skirt, and walked to the front with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Thank you, Mayor Stone. Members of the council," she began, her voice clear and carrying. "As you know, I am the sole heir to Honeysuckle House, following my grandmother Eleanor's passing. After a full assessment, I've decided to sell the property. I have a very strong offer from Oceanview Estates, who plan to develop a residential community that will significantly increase the town's tax base and bring in new, affluent residents." A murmur rippled through the room. She saw a few interested nods, but many more frowns. "With all due respect, Ms. Vance," Van said, her tone neutral, "Honeysuckle House is a Category B historical structure. Any significant external alteration or demolition requires approval from this council and the Historical Preservation Committee." "I'm aware of the designation," Elara said, offering a tight smile. "However, the structure is in an advanced state of disrepair. My own assessment, and I'm sure any impartial inspector would agree, is that it is beyond economically viable repair. The cost to restore it would far outweigh its value." "That's not true." Liam's voice cut through the room, calm but firm. He pushed himself off the wall and came to stand beside her, too close. She could smell sawdust and soap on him. "I've assessed the house myself for Eleanor," he said, addressing the council. "The foundation is solid. Old-growth timber. The issues are superficial, roof, siding, some plumbing and wiring. It's a restoration, not a teardown. And its value to this town isn't in its square footage, it's in its story. It's one of the 5 original homes that founded Cedar Hill. Tearing it down would be like tearing out a page of our history." "History doesn't put food on the table, Liam," a man in a feed store cap grumbled. "No, but tourists do," Liam countered, turning to face the room. "People come here for the charm, for the history. They don't come to see another gated community they could find in any suburb in America. If we start selling our soul for a quick profit, what do we have left?" He was good. He wasn't just appealing to their sentiment. He was appealing to their wallets, framing preservation as an economic asset. Elara felt a flicker of grudging respect, quickly extinguished by annoyance. "Mr. Byrne's attachment to the property is understandable," she said, her voice cool. But my legal right to dispose of my asset is clear. Oceanview Estates is prepared to move quickly. They've promised local contracting jobs. Temporary jobs, Liam shot back, turning to her. Followed by a community that will be owned by outsiders who'll use the town as a summer photo op. Is that what Eleanor would have wanted? For her home to be bulldozed so a hedge fund manager from Boston can have a better view. Don't you dare use my grandmother against me, Elara hissed, the mask of civility slipping. The room was utterly silent, watching their verbal tennis match. Van Stone cleared her throat. This is clearly a complex issue. The council will need time to review the historical committee's report, any structural assessments from both parties, and the full details of the Oceanview proposal. A final decision is tabled for now. This meeting is adjourned. The gavel fell. The immediate battle was a draw, but the war was far from over. As the room emptied, Elara turned to Liam, her blood running hot. This is a waste of time, she said. You're going to lose. He looked down at her, and for the first time, she saw not just anger, but a deep, profound sadness in his eyes. You know, Elara, when you left, I was heartbroken. But after a while, I just thought you were chasing a dream you needed to chase. I never thought the dream would turn you into this. Someone who sees a home as just a line item on a balance sheet. People change, Liam. Do they? He asked softly. Or do they just build higher walls? He walked away, leaving her standing alone in the emptying hall, his question echoing in the hollow space he left behind. Driven by a restless, churning energy, Elara decided to tackle the one room she had been dreading. Her old bedroom. The east bedroom, with the leaky roof. The stairs groaned under her weight, each creak a protest. The door to her room was slightly ajar. She pushed it open. It was a time capsule. The pale lavender walls were still there, though faded. A poster of a band she hadn't thought about in years was tacked to the wall. Her bookshelf was crammed with dog-eared copies of Austen and Bronte, mixed with thick business theory books she'd devoured even then. Hungry for a world beyond Cedar Hill. On the desk by the window, now warped from water damage, sat a small, framed photograph. She picked it up. It was of her and Liam, taken the summer they were 18. They were on the dock down at the lake, his arms slung around her shoulders, her head thrown back in laughter. She was looking at him as if he'd hung the moon. He was looking at her as if she were the only girl in the world. The memory washed over her, unbidden and vivid. I got the scholarship, she whispered, the letter crumpled in her fist. NYU. Stern School of Business. Liam's smile was wide, genuine. Elara, that's amazing. I knew you could do it. It's everything I've ever wanted, she said, but her voice was shaky. His smile faltered. What's wrong? It's New York. It's 1,000 miles away. He took her hands. So, we'll make it work. I'll visit. You'll come home for holidays. This is your dream. I'd never stand in the way of that. He kissed her then, a promise sealed under the summer stars. A promise that felt as solid and eternal as the old oak tree shading the house. But it hadn't been eternal. The distance, the new pressures, the intoxicating pace of her new life. It had all felt so much more real than the sleepy, predictable future Cedar Hill offered. She'd started pulling away. His letters and calls felt like anchors trying to drag her back to a shore she was desperate to escape. The final phone call had been her doing, a clumsy, cowardly severance. She'd told him it was over, that she needed to focus on her future. A future that didn't have a place for him. He'd been quiet for a long time, and then he'd simply said, "If that's what you want," and hung up. She'd thrown herself into her work, building her fortress, brick by brick. A cold drip of water landed on her wrist, pulling her back to the present. She looked up. A dark stain spread across the ceiling, a single drop forming, swelling and falling. The roof was leaking, just as he'd said. Frustration boiled over. She needed to do something, anything. She marched downstairs, found the number for a hardware store in the next town over, and ordered a tarp, a ladder, and a staple gun. She, Elara Vance, who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, would fix a damn roof. An hour later, she was wrestling with a giant, flapping sheet of blue plastic on the sloping roof, the wind whipping her hair into a frenzy. The ladder seemed terrifyingly flimsy. Rain had started again, a fine cold mist that made the shingles slick. She was perched precariously, trying to anchor one corner of the tarp, when her foot slipped. A gasp tore from her throat as she scrabbled for purchase, her heart leaping into her mouth. The ground seemed a mile away. Strong hands closed around her waist, steadying her from behind. "I've got you." Liam's voice was gruff in her ear, his body a solid warm wall against her back. He carefully guided her back to a stable footing on the ladder, his grip firm and sure. "What the hell are you doing, Elara?" he demanded, his anger laced with a fear that shocked her. "You could have broken your neck." Shaken, she clung to the ladder, her pride in tatters. "I was fixing the leak." "You were committing suicide by home repair," he retorted, but the anger was fading, replaced by a weary exasperation. "Move. Let me." He climbed past her onto the roof with an easy grace that was both irritating and impressive. He took the staple gun from her limp hand and within minutes, had the tarp secured, taut and professional. He climbed back down and stood facing her on the soggy lawn. The rain had darkened his hair and plastered his shirt to his chest. She was equally drenched, shivering in her now ruined silk blouse. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said quietly. "I'm not trying to prove anything to you," she shot back, but it was a lie. She was trying to prove she was self-sufficient, that she didn't need him, that she didn't need anyone. "Come on," he sighed, running a hand through his wet hair. "You're freezing. I'll make you some coffee. We need to talk. Not as adversaries. As two people who once cared about each other, talking about a house that matters to both of us." It was the most reasonable thing anyone had said to her since she'd arrived. And standing there, cold, wet and defeated, Elara found she had no fight left in her. She just nodded. Liam's kitchen was the antithesis of her own sleek, rarely used one in Manhattan. It was warm, lived in, and smelled of fresh coffee and bread. Tools and architectural blueprints shared space on the large farmhouse table with a bowl of apples. A dog, a lazy-looking golden retriever, thumped its tail on the floor from a bed in the corner. He handed her a thick, wool blanket and a mug of steaming black coffee. She wrapped the blanket around her shoulders, the simple kindness almost undoing her. "So," he said, leaning against the counter, his own mug in hand. "Ocean View Estates. They're vultures, Elara. They come in, make big promises, cut corners, and leave. They tried to buy the old Miller place last year, turn it into a mini-mall. We fought them off." "It's a solid business proposition," she said, but the words lacked their usual conviction. She was looking at a photograph on his fridge, Liam smiling, with an older couple who must be his parents. He was rooted here. He was part of an ecosystem. "Is that all you see?" he asked, his gaze intense.
À proposition?
"Do you remember anything, Elara? Do you remember the summer we rebuilt this very porch with my dad? You were terrible with a hammer, but you never gave up. Do you remember your grandmother teaching you how to bake her apple pie in that kitchen? The way she'd always have a jar of lemonade for me when I came by." Of course she remembered. The memories were flooding her now, a dam breaking. The feel of the sun-warmed wood, the smell of cinnamon and sugar, the taste of tart lemonade. The way Liam's hand would brush against hers, sending sparks up her arm. "I remember," she whispered, looking down into her coffee. "Then why?" The question was stripped bare of all anger, leaving only raw confusion. "Why are you so hell-bent on destroying it?" "I'm not trying to destroy it," she cried, looking up, her eyes blazing. "I'm trying to close a chapter. This place, it's full of ghosts, Liam. It's full of the person I was, the person I thought I'd be. And every time I'm here, I feel like I'm failing her. That girl who laughed on that dock would be so disappointed in the woman I became." The confession hung in the air between them, shocking her with its honesty. She had never said those words out loud. Liam was silent for a long moment. "I doubt that," he said finally. "She'd be in awe of what you've built. But I think she'd be sad that you built it all alone behind such high walls." He pushed off the counter and walked to a drawer, pulling out a folded, yellowed piece of paper. He handed it to her. I found this, tucked inside one of the sills when I was repairing your grandmother's window last year. I think it was meant for you. With trembling fingers, Elara unfolded it. It was her grandmother's handwriting. My dearest Elara, I know you're out there, conquering the world. I am so proud of you. But I worry too. I worry that in your climb to the top, you might forget how to be still, how to be happy. This house, it's not just wood and glass. It's a promise that there is always a place where you are loved, simply for being you, where you can rest, where your heart can be soft. I made a promise to a Byrne once, a long time ago, to always protect this spirit, this heart of our town. I'm passing that promise on to you, my darling. Don't break it. Don't break your own heart in the process. All my love now and always. Gran. Tears streamed down Elara's face, hot and unchecked. She made no move to wipe them away. The letter was a direct hit, a missile that had bypassed all her defenses and found its target. Liam watched her, his expression unreadable. She loved you, Elara. And she loved this town. She believed they were part of the same thing. She believed we were part of the same thing once. He reached out, his callous thumb gently wiping a tear from her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt that traveled straight to her core. It was a touch from another lifetime, a language her body remembered even if her mind had tried to forget. Their eyes met, and the air in the warm kitchen shifted, charged with the ghosts of the past and the painful, terrifying possibility of a future she had never allowed herself to imagine. The next week passed in a strange, suspended animation. Elara didn't call the lawyers. She didn't call Mark back. She spent her days at Honeysuckle House, not as a CEO assessing an asset, but as a granddaughter, slowly, tenderly, going through her grandmother's things. She found more letters, journals filled with observations about the town and its people, recipes, and pressed flowers from the garden. She learned about her grandmother's first love, Thomas Byrne, and how family pressures and the expectations of a different era had pulled them apart. She saw the deep, abiding friendship that had remained, a secret thread that had bound the Vance and Byrne families for generations. She started making small repairs herself. She fixed the dripping kitchen faucet, following the instructions her grandmother had left, her hands clumsy but determined. She weeded the overgrown flower beds, uncovering hardy perennials that were struggling for light. The physical labor was cathartic, grounding her in a way that boardroom strategizing never had. Liam would stop by, sometimes with a tool she needed, sometimes just to check on her. The tension between them had morphed. The sharp edges of their conflict had softened into a cautious, aching truce. They didn't talk about the sale or the council. They talked about his work, restoring old boats. They talked about her company, and for the first time, she confessed the soul-crushing exhaustion of it, the constant pressure. One evening, he found her sitting on the back porch steps, looking out at the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. You look tired, he said, sitting down beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. I am tired, she admitted, the truth a relief. I've been tired for a long time. You know, he said, his voice soft, that girl in the photograph, the one you think would be disappointed? I see her more and more every day you're here. Her breath caught. She turned to look at him. The setting sun gilded his profile, and in his eyes she didn't see the boy she'd left behind, but the man he'd become, steady, kind, principled. A man who built and preserved, instead of acquiring and discarding. Liam, she began, but the words stuck in her throat. I'm sorry. I was wrong. I never stopped thinking about you. He seemed to understand the words she couldn't say. He reached over, his hand covering hers on the sun-warmed step, his fingers laced with hers, a perfect familiar fit. It was the turning point. Not a dramatic, sweeping gesture, but a quiet, simple touch that bridged 20 years of silence and hurt. The final town council meeting was packed. Every seat was taken, people lining the walls. The air was thick with anticipation. Ocean View Estates had sent a slick, suited representative who presented glossy renderings of the proposed community, talking about progress and economic vitality. It was persuasive. When it was her turn to speak, Elara walked to the front. She saw Liam sitting with Mayor Van, his expression calm but his knuckles white where he gripped his knees. She saw the faces of the townspeople she was starting to recognize: the librarian, the baker, the fisherman. She took a deep breath. "Mayor Stone, members of the council," she began, her voice clear but different, softer. "When I first came here, I saw a liability. Problem to be solved. A chapter to be closed." She paused, looking out at the room. "I was wrong." A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. This house, Honeysuckle House, is not a line on a balance sheet. It is a promise. A promise of home, of history, of belonging. It's a promise my grandmother made to this town, and to her family, a long time ago. And it's a promise I intend to keep. She turned to the Oceanview representative. "I am withdrawing my acceptance of your offer. The house is not for sale." The room erupted. Some in cheers, some in groans of disappointment. She held up her hand for silence. "Furthermore, I will be personally funding the full, historically accurate restoration of Honeysuckle House, and I've asked Liam Byrne to lead the project." She looked directly at Liam. His face was a canvas of shock, hope, and dawning radiant joy. "But that's not all," she continued, turning back to the council. "I believe in progress that preserves. So I am also establishing the Cedar Hill Heritage Trust, with a significant endowment, to help other homeowners in town maintain and restore their historic properties. We can grow without erasing who we are." The applause was thunderous this time, genuine and warm. The vote that followed was a formality. The motion to protect Honeysuckle House passed unanimously. As the crowd dispersed, chattering excitedly, Elara made her way through the throng to Liam. "You," he said, shaking his head in wonder, "are full of surprises, Elara Vance." "I have my moments," she smiled, a real, unguarded smile that reached her eyes. "The Heritage Trust, that's incredible." "I learned from the best," she said softly, "both from my grandmother and from you." He reached for her hand, right there in front of everyone. "So you're staying? For a while at least?" She looked around the crowded hall, at the faces of her grandmother's friends, at the town she had once been so desperate to escape. She looked at Liam, at the future shining in his eyes. "I'm not just staying for a while, Liam," she said, her heart feeling fuller than it had in 20 years. "I'm coming home." 1 year later. The scent of fresh paint and beeswax filled Honeysuckle House. Sunlight streamed through the newly restored windows, gleaming on the refinished floors. The house stood proud and beautiful, its white clapboard bright, its porch sturdy, the honeysuckle tamed and blooming in fragrant bursts around the railings. Elara stood in the kitchen, which now boasted a beautiful modern functionality, while preserving its old-fashioned charm. She was pulling a perfectly golden apple pie from the oven, her grandmother's recipe finally mastered. Liam came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and nuzzling her neck. "Smells like home," he murmured. She leaned back into his embrace, a contented sigh escaping her. It was home. She had stepped away from the day-to-day running of Vance Holdings, taking on the role of strategic chairwoman, which allowed her to work remotely from Cedar Hill. She had traded her corner office for a sunny nook overlooking the garden, and the constant hum of anxiety for the deep, resonant peace of a life lived with purpose and love. The Cedar Hill Heritage Trust was thriving, having already helped restore a dozen homes and the old lighthouse. The town was buzzing, not with the frantic energy of outsiders, but with the organic growth of a community rediscovering its own value. "Ready?" Liam asked, taking the pie from her. She nodded, taking his hand. They walked out onto the porch, where their friends and neighbors were gathered for the first annual Honeysuckle House picnic, a celebration of the town's history and its future. As she looked out at the laughing faces at Van, at Liam's parents who had embraced her as their own, at the children playing on the lush lawn, Elara felt the last of her cynical armor melt away. The promise had been kept. Not just the promise to her grandmother or to the town, but the promise she had made to herself that long ago summer. The promise of a love that felt like coming home, and a heart that was finally joyfully soft.